Hello, everyone. Though we are at the end side of this conference, but I promise you that this chat, this interaction which you will witness, I think you will be loving it because this interaction is around the importance of PSUs in today's modern era. And before we start, I welcome Mr. Ajitabh Sharma, who is chairman of Rajasthan Tech Board.
Thank you, Kartik. Thank you.
Welcome to this National PSU Summit, Mr. Sharma. And I introduce you to Mr. Sharma first. He is a 1996 batch IAS officer. And in his 25 years of experience, not only in field but also in policy making, he has been associated with a lot of PSUs, corporations in his career. And also he has been in water sector, in energy sector, in transport sector. And you must be aware that Rajasthan is #1 in renewable energy. And when he was energy secretary of Rajasthan, he was also deeply involved in the making, drafting of solar and wind and hybrid energy policy of Rajasthan. So it's a privilege to have you here, Mr. Sharma. The topic of today's discussion is public utilities, the new challenges to them and the role of them in this new modern era. Though we all know that PSUs have been founding pillars of this country's growth economy and the socio-economic development. And when we we are at the juncture of 75 years of independence. So definitely in last couple of decades, private investment has increased, but the founding pillars were set by the PSUs. Mr. Sharma, my first question to you is that you have been to various corporations, various authorities, and various public sector units in your career. Do you think that these PSUs are very relevant or very important in today's era? And what sort of change or impact they make on the lives of people? What kind of help they do to the government today? So what is the importance of PSUs in today's times? Mr. Sharma.
Okay. First of all, I am very thankful to Economic Times, government, online vertical of the Economic Times group for inviting me here as the representative of the government, and thanks once again for appreciating the good work which is done by the state of Rajasthan, particularly the Rajasthan Renewable Energy Corporation Limited, in proliferating the and creating new generation capacity both in the solar and wind sector in the country. Now Rajasthan is #1 in solar power generation capacity as well as in the whole renewable portfolio, which includes solar, wind and biomass. So #1 is that. #2, it was the work which was done by whole team, not by me alone, because some of the officers are present and sitting there in the audience who represent RRECL, and too many questions. So I think since whole day long we have been listening to different industries and even some of the directors and managing directors of the central PSUs. So this chat becomes a slightly different kind of discussion and conversation for the audience. So my first take is that whether the question which you have asked perhaps is that whether the government should be in business or not, and what is the role of the PSUs, both the central PSUs and the state PSUs, yes, in delivering benefit to the public,
especially in public utilities like energy, water, transport.
So I'll try to answer it in brief. So whenever we talk about government, then let us first talk about the whole policy space which exists where government has to perform or government has to intervene. So it is not only the business or the markets. So when you talk about PSUs or public sector utilities or public utilities for that matter, so you're talking about the only business operations, the market operations where the government operates. But government operates in a larger ambit, which is the whole economy, and business and free markets are one part, though essential and very important part of whole of the economy. So whenever you try to analyze that whether we should be having organizations like Renewable Energy Corporation in these states, or we should be having SECI, that is Solar Energy Corporation of India at the central level, or IOC or NTPC, or for that matter, some of the warehousing corporations, or for that matter, even the hotel corporation, which is many states have, and there is one at the central level also. So in the larger ambit, when you talk about economy as a whole, and when you frame public policy, there is a macro question at the level of the government, among the or before the policymakers, that whether should the government be intervening into that particular area, say like NTPC, thermal power generation, say like SECI, for bidding out the renewable energy portfolio in solar and wind sector. Should government be there? Is government required? And if government is required, then certainly it has to happen in some form. So there are three broad categories when you talk about public economics, where the government can intervene into those areas. But say, for example, so my answer would be in form of another question. Where do you not want the government to be?
But do they really have a role to play in business now?
Yeah. So do you not want government to be in education? No, you want. If you ask a common man, do you want government to be in the health sector? Should you be wanting the government to operate and run hospitals? Because that is also a private, in the private sector, it is a business venture. But when government runs its hospitals, it is not truly a business venture. It is not assessed in terms of the balance sheet in black and white on the paper. It is more about the social benefits which government has to incur, which is the outcome which the government is wanting. So do you not want government in public transportation systems? You are wanting government to build roads in rural areas as well as in urban areas or not? Do you not want government to operate DMRC? You want. So the point is that in which sector and area you are wanting government to intervene. So the right question should be, should government be having any business in being in business is not the right question. Right question should be that in what manner government should be in there in that particular area. I will give you an example of like education. It's a perfect example. So in the education sector, like government intervenes in three forms. Government goes for direct provisioning, like government has its own schools. Government recruits and appoints teachers. Government pays them salary and subsidized education. And in many of these states, even free education is provided to children. So that is one aspect. Number two, not on the side of direct provisioning like building schools and opening schools. Many states have provisions like of education coupons, so where a child can go to a private school. Private school was built certainly by some investor or some philanthropist maybe, but the capital investment of state government is not there. But government funds is indirectly to the actual beneficiary. Government issues the like education coupons and vouchers, and anyone can go into, like the eligible persons can go to the private school, can encash their coupon there. So this is another method. And third manner is like government then regulates like higher technical education or medical education. Government cannot leave like medical education or higher technical education, the engineering colleges, completely to the private sector, because you have to decide the curriculum and you have to create a kind of network and linkage with the whole of the economy. So how in education government intervenes in all three sectors? So when India became independent in the year 1951, India was industrially very weak as compared to the other countries in the Western or the developed world. So to give a kind of fillip and to prime the whole economy, we needed public sectors like in energy, coal, then railways we already had, but it was completely restructured, warehousing, fertilizer production and manufacturing, we needed. But yes, your question is right in the sense that after this long period of 7 to 8 decades, we need to rethink. As I have said that there are three different manners in which the government intervenes. So what should be our intervention? Should we now be out of coal-based thermal power plants or not? We may think of, because now the private companies, the private investors, the private market is so much robust, particularly after the 2003 Electricity Act, when the structural reforms took place in the energy sector. Generation has been delicensed. So you will find a lot of big investors, big business houses who are into generation of electricity. So in a way, it has got deregulated to some extent. and it has gone to the private sector. And that is the reason that a lot of capital has inflown, because ultimately the capital and investment is going to come from the private sector, either from the banks or financial institutions, or in whatever manner we raise debt. But same has not happened in the distribution sector. When you talk about distribution utilities, they are loss-making. They are hugely loss-making. They are struggling with different kind of new challenges in the current era. But private sector has not been able to enter deep into it, because these are public utilities. These are something much, much more than public sector undertakings, PSUs, about which this conference is today. So yes, the role of the government has to change, but government certainly need to be there. You need FCI or not. Like
Right.
you need, so you certainly don't need salt production like sambar salts,
Right.
because salt production can be completely taken over by the private sector. It is possible. So you can like liquidate yourself out of
but
such
I would
kind
like
of
to understand from you
PSUs.
that you have been like, let's talk about the sectors where you have worked in: water, energy, public transport. Do you think in energy we see in renewable energy we see a lot of private investment, and when we talk of public transport, we see that not all the public transport are running in sort of a profit or something like that. So do you think what is the role of PSUs and government in water? Yeah, we can see there is not so much of private investment in water sector. So what is the role of PSUs now in such sectors where there are at times challenges of profit making as well, and all sort of challenges are always there which we can see. So what is the role of PSUs now?
So see, now with time, lot of things have changed. And so when you talk about that, whether government should be exactly there in like sectors like water and energy, so there is a concept of like public utilities, which is slightly different from public sector undertakings, about which we are talking about. So PSU is basically a kind of organization which is owned by the government. Government can have its stake in terms of equity, maybe cash equity, or maybe sometimes equity in form of land or some other form. Government may be having some kind of shareholding into that organization, or maybe the government is having some majority representation on the board of that organization. So that is a PSU. But public utility, when you talk about public utility, it basically relates to the essential services in the current times. When we talk about current, like electricity, it is the essential services. Water, it is essential services. Urban transport. So if you're going to ask from like any investor, or maybe even a conglomerate of investors, or a kind of syndicate which are in a capacity to raise like millions and millions of rupees for investment, even then they would shirk away if you ask them to make capital investment, because these public utilities are huge capital intensive projects, meaning which you cannot have two different set of distribution lines, electricity distribution lines. You cannot have two parallel sets of metro network. You cannot have parallel set of roads, like when you talk about urban transportation, because they involve huge sunk cost. And for the organization which is dealing with these essential services, it is necessary to provide them economy of scales. You cannot have multiple buried underground pipelines for water supply system. It is the same network which you will be using, and if required, when demand increases, you are going to expand that network. So the point is, in case of public utilities involved in essential services, when you particularly talk about water as a sector, I would say, because I have worked in water sector for quite some time, post 2003, after the structural reforms in the energy sector, particularly the electricity sector, when the unbundling of the whole energy sector happened in three different components like generation, transmission, and distribution, nothing of this sort has happened in the water sector. And it is very difficult to happen. But the most unfortunate part is that, like when you talk about Western world, even today and since long back, water sector is being dealt by the public utilities. Though those public utilities are majorly owned by either the kind of municipal corporations which are there, or by the government itself. But they are being handled by public utilities, like a kind of small corporation. But in here, we still have water distribution completely tackled by government departments. So that is one of the reasons that private capital, I think that was your question, private capital has not been getting attracted to the water sector like in the energy sector. Because in any energy sector, you float a bit today. Like if any government floats a bit today that I want to have such and such like 1000 megawatt of thermal power plant or 2000 megawatt of solar generation power plant, then you'll be bombarded with lot of interests. People are ready to invest because the whole financial market, the whole chain, the way the money flows, the low interest loans which you can take. Industries, we had a lot of presentations today. Industry has got a lot of good products. They've got innovative solutions like in solar panels and other things, how to increase the efficiency. So a lot of interest is there in energy sector. Water sector as such is a dry sector. The water should not be dry in terms of private capital to get attracted. So if we are in a position or if we can find a solution where we are directly or indirectly, like let it be managed by, in some states and in some of the union territories, we have a system like Delhi Jal Board we have. So if you have a utility framework, then things certainly improve in terms of raising money and investing more capital.
But at the same time, I see a lot of regulatory issues here. So do you think there's a need of regulatory reforms also?
In
I think
overall utility sector?
Basically,
So-
water, if you...
So like in energy is a highly regulated sector in a way,
Hmm.
but a lot of reforms are needed, particularly on one aspect, like when you talk about renewable energy, the integration of renewable energy. A lot of renewable energy is being generated, but it comes with the problem of intermittency and variability. So when you talk about the actual integration of renewable energy, which is intermittent and variable into the electric grid, there are a lot of challenges. For that, you need a very innovative kind of regulatory framework. You need a lot of changes in regulation, both at the CRC level and the state regulatory commission levels. But water on the other side doesn't have any kind of regulatory framework. There isn't any kind of independent and neutral agency which regulates. So water is one of the very interesting sector where it gets regulated by cross-sectoral regulators. Like you have got environmental regulator and laws, then you have got pollution boards, then you have like Clean Water Act, but not related to Water Act as such. So what are the health standards? Then there are health related and safety related standards, but no regulation as such to regulate the production of water, that is tapping of water from different sources, how it is transmitted and how it is distributed to different houses. It is simply implemented and carried on and managed only through administrative regulations and policies. So we need a very strong regulator in the water sector. And the moment we bring in the utility framework into the water sector, I think that is going to come up on its own.
Okay. So apart from that, what are the other major challenges in front of public utilities today?
So like regarding energy sector, I have spoken that one of the major challenges, because as I was hearing to Mr. Mohit Bhargav from NTPC, he said that coal is going to stay for quite some time, at least for 2 and 3 decades. So, but I know Mohit ji personally. He only himself is looking after the renewable energy portfolio of NTPC. But again, and for last few months, we are seeing the issue of coal shortage. So we are not going to discuss that in much detail right now. But the flip side is, you don't have coal, you cannot operate the thermal power plants up to a certain level. But the flip side is that even when you had coal, there is huge stranded capacity. These thermal power plants are operating at a plant load factor of in some states like not more than 55 to 60%.
Right.
So there is a challenge of stranded capacity in the power sector of old thermal power plants. We need to think about them. Second challenge is regarding the integration of the renewable energy. Third challenge is, I would say, on the list, I would prioritize it at third, the manner in which the adoption of electric vehicles is going to increase the adoption of electric vehicles in the near future. So it will create a lot of problems into the grid. It will create a lot of peaks in demands and gap in demand and supply. So managing electric grid would be very difficult and it would be a big challenging task. So for this, we would be requiring a lot of IT solutions, like the industry representatives are also present here. Fourth is like a time is soon going to come in the energy sector when electricity particularly, let us forget about coal, oil and natural gas, other things, would be that the consumer, that is your retail end consumer, the electricity utilities will have to make the consumer the partner in overall energy management, particularly the demand side management. Otherwise, it will be very difficult to manage and handle the grid, and you will end up in overcapitalizing whole of your energy infrastructure. So that is like time of use models or time of day use of or dynamic tariff or usage of smart meters. And next is like this cyber threat. We had a very good presentation. Cyber threat is a major issue because in the year, I think 2020, we had a major problem in one of the states in the country where more than 1.5 lakh smart meters were the major reason for blackout in the state during a festival season. And that was a IT failure, I would say. Maybe along with it came the kind of failure in taking speedy administrative decisions, but government cannot directly get into such things. Ultimately, the solution has to come out from the industry, from the IT experts. We need good products. So that is a big threat. The moment you end up in digitalizing generation, transmission, and distribution component of this whole energy sector, your threats would increase. And it would become, because see, the people who are there to hack or put in malware, so they would always try to be a step ahead of what the utilities are doing. So that is a big threat. And when we talk about water sector, there are a number of challenges, but I would try to cover only one point. The climate change impact would be the major reason, because most of our buried infrastructure, the buried pipelines and our distribution and treatment networks are based on fixed water resources. Like either it is surface water, it is from dam, it is from river, or it is a mixture of tube wells or open wells. What will happen after 10, 20 years? We do not know. And the way the urbanization is happening in our country, so it is not easy. You can come out with a thermal power plant in a period of 2.5 or 3 years, if you are determined to do that at any XYZ place and transport coal and generate power, or you can place solar panels. But for water, you cannot do that. It is going to be one of the most critical challenge. So if climate change affects your water resources, if it increases the unpredictability on which the drinking water network is dependent, then how to handle that? So there are many countries which are doing very good work in like this projection and modeling and what will happen like with 1 degree increase of temperature or 2.5 degree increase of temperature. So I think these are the areas where we need
so
to
last
focus.
Quickly, if you answer my last question, as you counted so many challenges in this utility sector, be it water, energy or transport, quickly if you can answer me, what and up to what limit government's role should be there in utility governance?
Okay, so now utility governance is mix of many things: urban transport, water, energy, warehousing, rail networks, city bus transport, like we have RSRTC in Rajasthan. So ultimately, the solution lies in privatization, deregulation, disinvestment, outsourcing to obtain better solutions in the government system or in the PSU or in the public utilities, and a robust and very strong system to assess the uncertainties which may arise of different number of reasons, because these are essential services and government is certainly going to have a role to play for a long time to come, because people want it like that. People want government to intervene whenever they are in trouble. So government cannot pull its hand out of these essential services. So we will have to preempt things. We will have to create systems, maybe IT based or artificial intelligence, and predictive decision making has to be the key focus for future.
So that's right, Mr. Ajitabh Sharma, and thank you for your insight, giving us insights on that. Yes, there is a role of public sector, of government in the utility sector, and but there should be a balanced decision making and there should be a balanced approach. And thank you so much for discussing with us on this very important topic. And here, do we have a question? But we don't have time for questions.
Let us take one question.
Okay, please.
Yeah.
जैसे टेलीकॉम सेक्टर है, हर किसी का अपना हाईवे है, गवर्नमेंट का अपना हाईवे है, OMC और केबल, रिलायंस का अपना है, एयरटेल का अपना है। तो आपका उस पे टेक क्या है? जो सक्सेस रहा इसे और सेक्टर में भी आजमाना चाहिए या यही रुक जाना चाहिए?
See now, yeah, but I have got your point. But now see at the local level, because now in telecommunication sector, the private sector has become so strong, technology has become so robust. So now there is inter-negotiation between the firms and companies also, that how to cross-utilize the infrastructure. But again the point is, can government totally leave the telecommunication sector unregulated? No. So let there be a free play. If the market dynamics, or because ultimately what is happening, that TRAI, Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, is keeping a tab on the tariffs of per phone call basis, how it would be used, interporting is allowed or not, how it will happen. So at that level, so out of those 3 areas of government intervention, in telecommunication, government has kept a stand like, okay, we'll try to regulate it, but we'll allow the private sector and industry to grow, evolve, because then only they will come out with innovative solutions. Once competition is being injected, if competition is allowed, if competition can have a fair play in that sector, then government should have a minimum role. So now, because we had CPSUs in the telecommunication sector also, but now they are not being pushed so hard by the government that they should be in profit, they should expand their network. That is not the approach of the government. And neither it should be. Because now, if private sector grows, government should try to regulate it. Same is with the financial markets, like the stocks and other things. There is SEBI. So minimum regulation so that there is free competition. But if things go haywire, where they are impacting public as such as at large, then government ultimately holds the baton. The government has to. Yeah. Okay, so generation we have achieved quite a lot, electricity generation. Next sector should be transmission, if you ask me. Because even in transmission sector, power transmission. And ultimately we have to go for privatization of the distribution sector. You go either by franchisee basis or your geographical license, grant of license basis. There are different models for privatizing the distribution sector. Because actual problem in electricity sector lies in the distribution sector, where the government utility or the private utility is interacting with the retail and consumer. All problem lies there, and future solutions are also lie there. So we should go whole hog for privatization of the distribution sector, but keeping under regulation, because ultimately you have to maintain energy equity and fairness also, because it cannot happen that you end up in buying 15 rupees of a unit, because I cannot spend my 70% of my income, monthly income, in paying into electricity bill. So it has to be cross-subsidized. So those norms and regulations would be finalized and put in place by the government only.
Right. So
that is one sector.
In nutshell, I think a balanced approach is required. And when we talk of the role of...
Yeah, I cannot hear you, please. Can you be a little bit louder?
We have seen in telecom sector when in 1995 when Airtel came in the mobile telephony, this DOT and the MTEL were not allowed to be in this mobile telephony. That charge used to be 16 rupees outgoing call per minute and incoming call 2 rupees. And when in 2002 MTEL BSNL entered this mobile services, the same day, it not took only 1 or month to the same day, incoming call was free and outgoing call was reduced to 2 rupees per minute.
Yes.
So
yes.
the public sector is required to be there in robust conditions to control the market and to fulfill the social obligation of the government of India and or government in any sector.
I cannot agree more than what you are saying. You are perfectly right, but I would try to rephrase it a little bit. Government should not try to control the market. Government PSU should have a role in market. So till the time, like you have given a very good example, if a telecommunication company is able to give competition to private sector, it is ultimately for the benefit of the end consumer. So that is what I have said. What is the right time to remain in the market for the CPSUs? If the private sector market has become robust, it is sufficiently competitive in terms of coming out with proper price discovery, I think then we need to rethink. But yes, you are right.
Sir, definitely we believe that there should be a fair level playing field, but it should be for government PSUs also, because we don't find the level playing field for the government PSUs, because we have seen in every sector. So we have a lot of examples. This is a long issue to be discussed because we don't have time.
Right.
So that's why.
Yeah, there are several challenges to PSUs as well as the private sector to discuss here in the country. But yes, the principle of minimum government and maximum governance should be applied here. A balanced approach is the same. So I think great insights, Mr. Sharma. Thank you so much for sparing time. And here we close the discussion.
Thank you, Kartik. And